Good afternoon. I'm Anuj Mehrotra. I'm the Dean of the George Washington School of Business. I am delighted really to welcome you to this session in the George Talks Business Series today. Before I introduce our guest today, let me introduce my colleague, Professor Rodney Lake, who is the Deputy Chair of Finance Department as well as the Director for the Investments Institute. And he is going to be helping me host this session today. Now, it is really my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest, Mr. Russ Ramsey here, who is the founder and chairman of the CEO of Ramsey Asset Management. He is also a George Washington School of Business alum, and he is the chairman emeritus of the GW Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining us today, Russ.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let me jump right into the first question. Since you are an alum from here, I believe you got your bachelor's degree in business in 1981. I want you to take us back to that time and say, how was it then and how has the school changed today?
Well, thank you, Dean, and I'm thrilled to be here. It's always great to be back on campus. I always look around when I'm here, and I'm just amazed at everything that's going on, the activity, the tremendous diversity. I really think George Washington is one of the best positioned universities in the world. And so I also consider myself to be one of the most blessed. I was born in Washington, grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, went to public high school, and was first in my family to get a scholarship. I actually came here on a baseball scholarship. And that was a time, as I look back, I felt very fortunate because I had a great mom and dad, I had a great family. But I actually grew up in a time of a lot of turmoil. And, today we look around in the coronavirus, everything that's happening in the sort of national elections, everything's happening in the capital markets, and it always feels like, my goodness, this is such a time of change. But when I look back, growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, it was a time of real change. I was in a school system that was the first school system in the country to sort of do forced busing. The late 60s was a time of great unrest. But I have to say, none of that really mattered. At the time, I sort of survived through sports. I wasn't a particularly good student. I came here thanks to the generosity of scholarship, and it's a very different place today. We were not remotely the campus activity and all of the vibrancy that existed exists today. Looking back, what was a constant was the sort of the magic of the nation's capital and the political process and all the things that made it so exciting. We played actually our baseball games on the West Ellipse, which was that public park between the White House and the Monument. It wasn't exactly what you'd consider a great baseball field, but it made for great excitement and quite a home field advantage.
So Russ, you are a passionate entrepreneur, and I believe when we talked earlier, you said we are living in a golden age of entrepreneurship today. But I want you to take us back to the first business you started, and what was going on in your head then at that point, and just tell us a little bit about your early career.
Sure. So again, I look around in this room and I think back to those times here, which I've often said to myself and to my children and to others that being at George Washington University in this place at this time, it's the 4 best years of your life, and really enjoy it no matter what. And the truth is, when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like many athletes, you sort of have these aspirations and big league dreams, but the truth is, most of us are never going to do that, and certainly in my case, that was very true. And so when I left here, I had a business degree, I had student loans, I truly had 1 suit and I think 2 ties, and I needed a job. And so, for me, I consider myself very lucky because at the time, you sort of have a degree, you feel good about yourself, but you don't really have any skills. And I say to all of my friends and peers today that you don't have to overcomplicate it. You want to go out, you have sort of 3 choices. You can either go into business, you can go into academia, or if you have a very specialized sort of path, you're an engineer or you're a CPA accountant, or you have a very specific area, you can sort of take that. But if you don't, then the real goal is to just go into a business. Get a job in wherever you can. I tend to believe, and I tend to suggest people to go into revenue, and revenue generally is thought of as sales. And why? Because in business, that's where everything happens. And that's where you actually have to be a part of every part of the food chain. And that doesn't mean everyone is going to end up and stay in revenue, but what it allows you to do is figure out what you're good at. In my case, I immediately had a mentor. Mentorship is very important. I met one of my future business partners literally when I had my first job at a company called Pitney Bowes. It was a relatively well thought of company then. They made postage meters in mail rooms. So when people ask me if I speak language, more than one language, I say, yeah, I speak English, mail room, transportation. You have to speak lots of languages. But I was very fortunate to understand and be in a great sales environment. And it allowed me to think and figure out what I was good at. And so I say that to everyone because it's only when you've done that in an environment where you are able to figure out what your strengths are, can you then find process and passion that then allows you to think about going back to school, think about going into finance, going into human resources, going into manufacturing, going into whatever it is, or business isn't for me, and you then find something else that has a passion. But I think it's really important to find a right platform, to have people around you that you respect, and you only need to have one or two people that that's the person that I want to figure out how they do what they do, and then you learn a lot about yourself.
So I want to ask a connected question, Russ. So take that skills and experience. How did you apply that to starting FBR, Friedman Billings Ramsey? So skipping forward a little bit in your career, the investment bank.
Sure. So I believe that much in life and what happens in life starts with a little bit of skill, a lot of luck, and a dirty little four-letter word called work. And I'd say from my perspective, I had great parents. They taught my brother and I the value of getting up early, staying late. And back to what you said, finding out what you're good at. And so it was through that, it was really through that first job and having some success in an office equipment industry that I sort of had this opportunity to go to the scary world of Wall Street. And the reality is I hadn't studied finance. I wasn't particularly astute. I had certainly done some work. And the only thing I know about Wall Street was I didn't know much, but I developed some skills in sales and marketing. I was with a group of partners who sort of taught me and led me along the way. And so back to that, sort of be the first one there and the last one to leave, through time, figured out the capital markets, and we were a small research, sales, and trading firm who, because of timing and coming back again to today with everything that's going on in the capital markets, I think it's really important in all the business, but certainly in the financial markets, to sort of try to put things in context. And I don't think that history really repeats itself, but it does sort of rhyme. And so we had the boldness, if you will, to pledge our personal assets, take out a loan, and start a firm in what seems like a long time ago now, 1989, which in hindsight looked like one of the worst times to start a business because it was the beginning of the Great Recession. It was the banks and melting down because of a whole different reason, and the country coming to a recession. But those many times are the best times to find opportunity. And so a little bit of skill, a little bit of luck, and opportunity.
Maybe a quick follow-up question. You guys went from startup to a major player in a Wall Street-dominated industry. How did you do that?
So as entrepreneurs, you have to start every day figuring out, where you can find niches and opportunities, where you can perhaps do things that the big firms, the big behemoths either don't pay attention to or can't. In our case, there's this other important dynamic sort of understanding the big picture. And when you're in it, you can't always understand it, but it's important to have a little bit of a macro perspective. And so in our case, the markets had gone from being very retail dominated, where retail brokerage firms and fixed commissions dominated how the markets worked, to kind of the beginning of the institutionalization of the markets. Mutual funds, hedge funds, these bigger pools of capital were emerging. And so we were solutions oriented. So, there's a little bitty company now that some people have heard of called Amazon, and an entrepreneur named Jeff Bezos. And I'd encourage everybody who cares about business to read Jeff Bezos' first annual report as a public company in 1997, a little over 20 years ago, where he talks about every day is day one for Amazon, and to have a relentless customer focus. And fast forward, obviously this has been a once-in-a-generation success story, but there are basic core tenets that have allowed that company to go from a business nobody thought would be successful, which was selling books online, to some of the most dynamic and disruptive and successful businesses ever. And I'd say, looking back to the early days of Friedman Billings Ramsey, when we were, 12 people, four desks and 3 chairs, it was, every day find a way to create a solution for our customers. And if we, in this case, found underpriced and mispriced securities that they could buy, that they could short, that they could perhaps set up in some type of an arbitrage that made money for them, it would go on. So it was a relentless focus on the customer. And that's how we went from a very small firm to one of the larger investment banks in the country. And again, back to timing, the real success for us is the world had been dominated since the 30s by regulations that prohibited banks from being in the capital markets business, and the rules changed in the 90s. We were able to go public. We were able to grow very fast. And again, but it was always this relentless focus on the customer. Solutions for the customer, and good things will happen.
So you actually mentioned quite a few things, and I chose the academia because I did not have this opportunity of this advice that I'm going to ask you now for our students. One, you mentioned luck, you mentioned work, you mentioned opportunities where you are finding something which is a hole or a gap in the marketplace. But when a budding entrepreneur who has not had that experience, if you were to look back, what are some of the criteria? How would you have assessed risk versus reward when entering something? What kind of advice can you give in how to assess that risk, and what are some of the things that you really need to make sure you are on good standing before you go in and bank on the luck there?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned before, I have said I believe this is a golden age of entrepreneurship, and I really believe that. But that doesn't mean entrepreneurship is right for everybody. You can be an entrepreneur inside a big company. You can be an entrepreneur on your own. You can be an entrepreneur in other environments. Having said that, for me, I think it became very clear early on that I wanted to be a disruptor, that status quo wasn't probably going to work, that I needed to be challenged by what was possible. And so what I say to anyone talking about starting a business is 4 or 5 things. 1, be very clear what problem you're solving. 2, be very clear how you get paid and what is the revenue model. 3, if you can do it with your own money or borrowing it from your parents or begging for it from your grandparents or raising it from your friend, start there always. But then if you can't, make sure that you have a runway to where you can actually have the time in order to see your idea sort of play its way out. The final thing, which I just think is really important, is there are brilliant people in the world and sitting in this room and all across the place, and there are a handful who do it on their own by themselves, whether they're taking credit for it or not, and don't need partners. But I think partnership is a word that is not under focused on, and I would not be here without great partners in every aspect of my life. So it's the old idea of balanced brain teams is, everybody's good at something, but almost nobody is good at everything. So partners, and then always have strong people around you. If you look at the business unsuccess stories and things that came to bad ends, it's typically because there aren't strong people around making sure that there's processes in place, regardless of how successful a place can be. And we're seeing that throughout the markets and the tech community today.
So 2-part follow-up here on that, which is, how do you think about when you're running the business from the CEO side? So you're the entrepreneur, you're running the business, so how do you set priorities? And then maybe if you could flip on the other side of the coin, as an investor in a startup company, how are you evaluating the investments? How are you evaluating management? How do you think about the investment? So 2 sides of the same coin, but very different perspectives.
Sure. I think the lessons I've learned in leadership, and every day we're trying to create value. I've heard Kevin Plank from Under Armour say every day, you're either making a deposit or a withdrawal. He's looking for people who are trying to make deposits, those that are adding to the pie, sort of creating value, making the pie bigger. And so as an entrepreneur, and when I think about leadership, I also just recently got back from Antarctica. which none of you would probably care about right now, but it's the seventh continent, is truly the end of the earth. And when you're down there, the really great thing about it is you're off the grid. I had my own internet-free zone where I actually was just, could actually enjoy, what is the seventh continent, the 98% ice, and truly a place that defies logic. But I came back with sort of 4 words that really struck me, which I wish I had focused on probably earlier in my life. And it's a lens that I've sort of walked through, but I would say to you, I wish I'd walked through it more, which is with setting priorities, it starts with why. And if you can't answer why, then you really can't go forward. Why now? Focus and finish. And those are really important ways to set priorities. And particularly today, with all the distractions and how the world works and everything going on and just in time, feeds, news, information, et cetera, I think it's just really important to be able to say, in setting priorities, why now? If it's why now, focus on it and finish. And my prediction, if you can overlay that, is you'll have lots of happy, successful outcomes in whatever you do.
That's excellent advice. Let me change gears a little bit. And I know there's a lot of work that you have done in Washington, but I want to first understand from your perspective, how has Washington, D.C. changed? How has the metro area changed and evolved over a period of time? And particularly with regard to how it has become a pretty technology-oriented city right now, or DMV area right now. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So, I think we all probably, hopefully, have a tendency to want to be emotional about our hometown. I certainly am one that tries to be objective, but certainly am very proud of what the Washington area has become, and it's our nation's capital. It is obviously has a very important place in time and forever, but historically, obviously, Washington is thought of as the home of politics, of government, and even the business community. When you sort of think of the brand, it's thought of as a kind of a government business-centric town. And so what has occurred, not so quietly though, over the last 20 years, is that this region, what we call the capital region, which is Baltimore to Richmond, has quietly become one of the most vibrant tech and business corridors in the country. If you actually think about the economy from Baltimore to Richmond, it's the 3rd biggest economy in the U.S., 7th biggest in the world. And to the degree that scale matters and that the region actually operating together can actually work to get solutions done, it's now starting to become thought of as a place where increasingly not just George Washington University graduates want to live, work, and play, but the rest of the world wants to come to for talent. And so I mentioned Amazon before. Some of you may have seen that recently Amazon did a nationwide search for a second headquarters, had 235 bids, and ended up picking here, just across the river at Crystal City, for the second headquarters, which is really important game changer for how people, I think, look at our region and look about why they want to locate here. We were already, as an entity, one of the biggest producers of tech talent in the country, and so this whole focus, both here at George Washington and with many of the other universities in the region on, STEM and bringing digital skills into the curriculum, it's really important for everybody, not just people who are coming out and graduating now, but this whole digital transformation, which is the single most important issue going on inside businesses globally, is something which we are uniquely positioned to take care of. The other important component about just the business climate, now and I would say going forward, is that given that almost every industry today, more and more truly has got a component of it, which is the regulatory component that only happens here. I think what businesses, particularly the big technology businesses, are realizing is being closer to where those decisions are getting made is here. I think that was probably a piece of why Amazon came here. The main reason they came here was the access to talent and the belief that this actually has some of the most talented people in the world right here in the Washington area. And so the combination of all those, I believe, makes for a very bright trajectory going forward. And I think George Washington is right in the center of it.
So following up on this, could you maybe tell us, about collaboration in the region? And specifically, could you let us know what the Capital Collab is and why that's important?
Sure. So I also tend to think of events in life as either breakthroughs or breakdowns, and sometimes those breakdowns, which can show up as failures, or you missed a bid, or you didn't qualify, or you got cut from this, or you whatever, can tend to feel awful. But I also think things sort of happen for a reason. And so going back a few years ago, I was privileged to lead an effort to try to bring the 24 Summer Olympic Games to Washington, D.C. And the reality is, it would have been a spectacular games. We had the best bid, but for reasons that we don't control, it ended up going elsewhere. It was a hard-fought battle. We went from one of 24 to one of 4, so we were sort of the bridesmaid, not the bride. But no matter how you looked at it, it was a big disappointment. However, having said that, if we had gotten the Olympics, the Greater Washington Partnership would never have existed, which was essentially that same group from Baltimore to Richmond, the business community and the political and community leaders that had come together to sort of put us on the world stage in that way, started focusing on bigger issues. Some of those bigger issues were attracting businesses like Amazon. Some of those bigger issues were fixing some of the transportation underpinnings. But some of the bigger issues were also figuring out ways for our universities, and despite the fact that I bleed buff and blue, and I always will, the reality is we have great universities in the region, but we don't have one single dominant research university like you do in other places. So the reality is not one university is going to provide what the business community needs, by itself, but together in collaboration, it's very, very powerful. So the Capital CoLab is another part of the Greater Washington Partnership, where the 12 presidents of the largest universities in the Maryland system came together and said, we're going to agree on collaborating around creating a digital ecosystem. We're going to start at the undergraduate level, and we're going to go through, in this case, it was 42 knowledge, skills, and abilities. We're going to agree on those that are most important, and each of the universities are going to adopt a standard. So whether you're at George Washington or Johns Hopkins or Virginia Tech or UVA or George Mason or UMBC, wherever, you can get this digital tech credential. And if you do that, and everybody in this room can do that, by the way, if you do that, it makes you eligible for paid internships, selective hiring, and a roster of 20 of the most dynamic companies in the region who want you because of this focus on digital skills, making that statement. The same thing's true at the graduate level in cyber and artificial intelligence and machine learning and data analytics, because data and the ability to understand data, whether you're in philosophy, history, computer science, to be able to use it in the business world, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is to collaborate together so that on the world stage, students and businesses will look at this region and say they are being proactive, solutions-oriented, and they're differentiating themselves from the rest of the country.
Maybe a quick follow-up here is, so how should students prepare themselves? Is it getting this digital certificate? Is it a lifelong learning? And then maybe, and follow-up question to that is, you come from the world of finance and investing, maybe just a quick word about, how they can prepare for themselves for that world.
Sure, and candidly, I think, many students today, particularly in an undergraduate environment, probably understand this better than any of us do. I think this is as much a learning of all the other stakeholders. It's having faculty and administrators and leaders, understand that this is not a fad or a short term. This is this idea of digital skills and the need to embrace is the #1 issue for business across the world in terms of going forward. And it's upskilling and reskilling, so it's an important component for the current workforce. It's important for how decisions get made, and so who 10 years ago would have thought that artificial intelligence would be a component of just about any decision-making entity? But it's here and it's now, and it's not. But it's to demystify. It's not to make it scary. So someone, we recently had a panel discussion where one of the university presidents said, in the past, before the CoLab, you were either STEM or you were something else. And the reality, the goal here is not to someone feel like they're not a STEM student. It doesn't matter. or conversely, if you are a STEM student, you've got it all figured out. It's all, the worlds are all coming together.
Right. So before, I know we are going to run short of time, so I'm going to ask the audience if there are any questions, please. We'll take a couple of questions if you want to start lining up behind the mic if you do have a question. And while they are doing that, let me take you back to your days of serving on the board of Trustees. Now, I know you are a busy person. You have got lots of things going on.
Weren't you going to ask me about my baseball records?
I will certainly
go through a few,
free to talk about that. But I do want to hear a little bit about what was the enjoyable part of serving on the board. And then a follow-up of that, I know you're a very philanthropic man. You have been making a lot of impact. Even the CoLab involvement is really making an impact in the community and preparing the students for the future and the marketplace itself. What drives you in terms of how do you choose what to contribute to, where you should spend your time, and what you should do in terms of philanthropy?
Well, what drives me is simple. It's called chronic insecurity. No, I'm not really sure what drives me per se. I do think probably everyone has kind of an invisible T-shirt on that that says there is no finish line, and I think in life that's just kind of the case. I'm actually now just recently became a member of a very exclusive club. I turned 60, and I have to say that actually I think the best part of my life is ahead of me because there's just so much left that I want to do and unsolved opportunities that I want to sort of proceed and do a part of. But I will tell you, in my life, having the privilege to serve as a trustee here and to lead the board for 6 years is one of the great privileges of my life. And the reasons is just a couple-fold. I mean, you don't quite realize it till you get later in life, but universities are a precious entity. That there's very few things in life that you can absolutely count on, but one thing you can almost certainly count on is that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, this university will be here, and it will be doing something which is so important, which is preparing citizen leaders, giving them the space, the breadth, the depth, the learning, all the above in order to go out and make their mark in life. And so having an opportunity, particularly as an entrepreneur, where we were privileged to have some businesses that grew up to be, a couple, 3, 4, 5,000 people and, had big impact, but this is different. This is like a precious asset, and I'm proud to say that we, among other things, when I was there, put in term limits because if we didn't, I'd still be there. So I can see why people go kicking and screaming, leaving boards, but all good things need to be transitioned. And so, I've got dozens of great stories, but I will tell you the things that we did. What I miss the most about not being on campus a bunch is the students. Is things that we would do. Which is one of the reasons that we were so excited to start the GW Investment Institute and to start the Student Run Endowment Fund, which you have so ably led, and to try and plant those seeds that can grow and flourish.
Maybe, so quick follow-up on that. I know I'm fully biased about the Investment Institute, but maybe give a word for everybody, why you started that. We started back in 2005 with an idea, and I think when you put the money in, you and Norma, your wife, were generous enough to put the money into the endowment and have students management. What gave you confidence that we could do it?
Well, sure. So, the first rule of marketing is find a need and fill it. And while this wasn't a marketing dynamic, I think we observed that that many of the investment endowment managers running equity portfolios, were having trouble keeping up with the S&P 500. That's been talked about and well known. And I think we had a view that we could, there's a better way to describe it, if we could sort of dumb down the investment process, take out the duration and the liquidity issue, have very specific set of rules and guidance, and take all the noise out like we're experiencing today, among other things, that we could teach students how to look at stocks as businesses and to understand those business characteristics and to think for the long term. And we had embraced, Buffett, Munger, very, very esteemed and proven processes that in most investment environments don't get a chance to be done because they're too short-term focused. And so now I'm very proud that now almost 14 years later?
This is our 15th year.
15th years later that we have largely proven that students can outperform most of Wall Street.
GW students.
GW students, excuse me. I apologize. GW students. And I want to give great credit to the leadership of Rodney and the rest of the GW Institute for sticking to those guns. Good. We got a question.
Yes, well, first, thank you for coming and speaking to us. It's really interesting to hear all your perspectives, especially as a GW grad. My question is kind of revolving around what you said about the digital transformation. Over my time at GW as a student, I've noticed kind of two schools of thought around the digital transformation as it applies to, starting a career. One is, you, in order to be successful in the digital transformation, you have to specialize. Either you are a kind of like you said, like a STEM person and, very programming savvy oriented, or you stay away from that completely, as you have to specialize to succeed. And then the other school of thought is with the digital transformation, business and sales and marketing and the STEM side of that industry, they're kind of interlinked. What do you think about whether either one of those is right or wrong, or where you would, if you were, a emerging professional in the digital transformation, where would you be positioning yourself?
I think she may have asked a question for you to advise us.
It's a great question, and I think you are observing the world's coming together right now as we speak. I think your observation is spot on that certainly up until just recently, the STEM worlds thought of themselves as isolated, and then there was everything else. I think what we're trying to do at the Capitol CoLab and what I'm thrilled to see President LeBlanc doing with the STEM initiative and what I'm hearing from Dean here at the business school is a recognition that there's a digital ecosystem needed and skills needed in all areas. And so my best advice, wherever you are in your education, getting your degree, is just to embrace and take advantage of classes that speak that same language. And you'll, I believe it'll become self-evident when you get that first job, where your skills are and where you're best suited. But just realize that data analytics, the ability to use data, is something that everyone has to have. And if it feels foreign to you, don't run from it. Embrace it.
Great. Let's take one final question from the audience.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. So a quick question. A lot of students here can be going from both students and later on becoming leaders. Could you maybe give some advice or lessons learned, that transition from being a member of a team to actually leading a team, since you do that from entrepreneurship, and also that's one of the great skill sets that people have to figure out how to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And leadership can ultimately express itself in a bunch of forms. I think I probably come at this a bit, the old school way is embrace every task with the goal of doing it the best you can do. And I was never fortunate to have formal military training or be a part of skills based that you think of with great leadership. But I think if you approach things with we versus I, and look around to the people you respect and admire who are putting team first, I think your leadership style will evolve. And again, everybody's good at something. Not everybody's good at everything. And focus on those strengths and spend your time leveraging those strengths. It's just like your portfolio. Let your winners run and cut your losses early. It's the same thing true with leadership. Go with your strengths, and if some things that you're not good at, find a partner, find someone to sort of pull it together, and be rigorously focused on finishing and having big dreams and big aspirations.
Great. Russ, I know we are out of time, but I cannot not take the opportunity to ask you to comment on how the markets are behaving and what's going to be happening, and tell us some good things, especially with coronavirus scare that's in there.
So I have no crystal ball. Probably have less information than anyone else as it relates to, what does the environment this time next year look like. But what I would say is, from an investment perspective, my best analysis is that the current unfortunate circumstance of another flu strain called coronavirus is probably going to knock 1 to 2% off of GDP growth. So I suspect we will, if not technically go into a recession, we'll get close to a recession. The reality of that is, we'll see more than normal volatility in equities, and in particular in equity prices, until people figure out what the sort of earnings are going to look like. But I would not lose sight of the fact that what this has done to interest rates is taken the 10-year down to the lowest price ever. And all of us fundamental investors have always been taught that there's sort of three things you got to focus on. The risk-free rate, which is a 10-year Treasury, which is now down below 1%, inflation, and earnings. And best I can tell, we've never had a risk-free rate this low, which makes equities very, very attractive. Inflation is, for all practical purposes, seems to not be a factor anywhere, and so that you have to pay attention to. And the economy is going to recover from this. This will be a 1 or 2 quarter phenomena, and I think we have lots of reason to be optimistic on the world stage that we've got a lot of good things in front of us.
Well, great. I know we are out of time. Thank you very much, Russ. What has been a very enjoyable conversation.
great to be here.
Thank you, Rodney, for joining me, and thank you all for being here today or online. George Talks will continue on Monday, March 9th, when we will host Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Panel. We look forward to seeing you then, in person or online. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Great. You've got to